do. So yeah, just some other house rules before we get started as well. So your camera and microphone are turned off by default. You can join in during the session during the chat function as well. So if you've got any comments or anything you want to pop in there, please do. We'll jump on them if we can. We'll try and keep our eye as best we can during the panel. But if you have any questions, please put a Q at the start of your comment as well, just so we can more clearly see that you've got a direct question for what was said. And as I said, we'll do our best with those. But we will give an opportunity at the end to possibly ask questions as well. So we'll be able to get you on camera and microphone if you want to, or you can just put them in the chat at that point as well. But yeah, otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Alex from the Careers team. We've also got Nick from the Careers team in the business school with some people who are joining us for a live screening. I'm hiding in the room just around the corner. But I'd like to introduce Christopher Leach, first of all. Chris is going to be leading the panel today. So over to you, Chris, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks, Alex. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today on behalf of EHU Careers. I've got three fantastic EHU alumni with us to sort of talk through some of their experiences. Now, for those not familiar with this type of setup, this is a panel. So it's not going to be a presentation as such. We're going to be going through some questions you've submitted, not verbatim, so please don't be offended if that's the case. I'm going to be lobbying these to our panelists, and we'll be sort of, hearing everyone's thoughts on them as we go through the discussion. As Alex noticed, there is some ability to sort of communicate via the chat. We will be monitoring that, and maybe time for more questions at the end. Quick bit about me, just for those who don't know, which is fewer and fewer by the day, especially on campus. I'm Christopher Leach. I'm one of the GTAs over in psychology. I'm looking at video games and student mental health. I'm also an EDI advocate, an accessibility consultant, and a content creator. So I stream and sort of do a podcast, which is why I've got this very fancy setup with a nice little ring light and all things like this. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a visually impaired person with albinism, so I have sort of what I would define as a visible difference, but an invisible disability, given that the old eyes don't work so great. But yeah, it was a real pleasure to be asked to do this, and I'm very, very excited to hear what the panelists have to say in regards to their experiences with employment. It kind of sits nicely as well in that just the other day it was International Albinism Awareness Day. Next week is Learning Disability Awareness Week. So this falls really nicely in sort of where we are. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Molly, if that's all right. I've literally just picked you on the spot. We didn't plan this. And then we'll go around and the other two panelists can introduce as well.
Thank you very much, Christopher. So, as mentioned, my name is Molly. I'm a children's psychological therapist working for YPAS, the Young Persons Advisory Service in Liverpool. I studied at Edgehill for my undergraduate in counselling and psychotherapy, and at my master's level in child and adolescent mental health and wellbeing, and my pronouns are she, they.
Zoe, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Zoe. I studied psychology at Edgehill, and I am now a clinical support worker with Wirral CAMHS. So I specialise in anxiety and low to moderate mental health issues in primary school children. And my pronouns are she and her.
Last but not least, Steve.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So my name's Steve, as you know. I studied a PGCE course, primary education, from 2019. So I'm one of those lucky ones who got to do it through lockdown and experience the upheaval of being kicked out of school when you're on placement to go and sort of retrain elsewhere. But it's been a pleasure at Edgehill and a pleasure to be here and share my experiences of being a teacher with a disability. Oh, sorry, pronouns he, him as well. Sorry.
Excellent, lovely stuff. So, as I mentioned, we've got kind of a few pre-generated questions that we've kind of used to form a discussion. So, we're going to start with the beginning of the journey, and we're going to talk about yourselves and how you find HE. itself, going through your degrees. Firstly, did you have any sort of particular support? Did you access DSA? What were your experiences sort of going through the motions in that regard? If we'll go around the other way, tell you what, Steve, if you want to start.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I initially went back to education at 23 to do an access course and did an undergrad, and that's where I got assessed after being told at school that I was purely lazy and just to get on with my work. So it wasn't until later that I got the support, and then when I came to Edge Hill in 2019, I just brought my same paperwork with me and received a fantastic DSA support. Obviously, I applied to the DSA to get financial support, for the computer and everything else. But the support on campus was absolutely brilliant. In the education department, the team there were outstanding. I couldn't ever fault them. They were always there for me if I needed them. I think the key was communication. It was always communicate with whichever team department you want to work with and get support from. Just let them know, and they're always there to help you. And then obviously that's where I left and went off to work.
We will sort of slowly fall into a rhythm of it. So Zoe, Molly, if either of you would like to jump in.
So my disability is I have muscular dystrophy, which is something you're born with and starts from an early age. So I was assessed in like primary school quite early on for needs. Unfortunately, it wasn't really until I came to university in 2018 that I really got support for my disability. I'd kind of had to fend for myself a lot in previous education, which was very difficult, but it was such a breath of fresh air to come to Edge Hill and finally be able to access like just normal support, even the DSA with laptop, special bags so I could put it on my wheelchair, and it truly enabled me to just focus on my education and not have to burn myself out or make myself unwell just to be able to study. So it was just a really positive experience for myself.
I suppose for me, my journey and disability is a bit more complex. So when I did my undergraduate, I did not have a disability. However, my particular disability is fibromyalgia. I developed that as part of long COVID back in June 2020. Like yourself, Steve, I was one of the lucky few who attended my master's degree entirely online. But part of my initial COVID bodily response, was I suffered vocal damage for 9 months, and that started at the beginning of my master's. So I kind of came into my master's course unable to speak, which can be quite disparaging for someone who works as a therapist, as I did, and I do now, sorry. And as such, when I was accessing support through the university, I didn't go through DSA, however, but echoing what Steve has said, communication was so important. Making myself known to my lecturers and supervisors was really important for me to get myself kind of on an equal playing field with my colleagues who were cohorts, other students who were able to speak or able to be physically there for lectures.
That's great. Okay, so it's come up in the chat, but it kind of feeds into sort of what I was next going to ask about in how we navigate sort of declaring our disability. Obviously we've had a few different sort of conversations here. At this point, mine is very visible, so I kind of lead with it. It's also been from birth, so I've always sort of had that paperwork, if you will. I've always had that with me to be able to know with some specificity what support I would need, and I think that's always been like I would say to my advantage. So when we talk about this, have yourselves found a situation where declaring your disability in work or even sort of within uni has been challenging, problematic, positive? Zoe, if you want to start us off.
quite a similar experience with yourself, and because it was from birth, I've always kind of led with it, and I've always had the relevant paperwork to declare it. But I'd say when I first started applying for jobs, it was a little slightly trickier, because obviously you just apply online via forms and you just tick a bit of a few boxes, and sometimes it can be difficult to fully explain a bit more about your disability. But I was very lucky in that when I did get called for an interview, I got the opportunity to declare it straight away to my employer, and that made it a lot easier. So I'd say it was more or less quite an easy transition.
I do kind of want to piggyback on that. Apologies for the other panelists, but like, you know, it brings up an interesting point of, and I had this discussion very recently myself, like, when is a good time to declare it? I've always kind of gone that mine's very health and safety if I'm, I don't know, in a dangerous arena, shall we say. So I always lead with, I always stick it on the form. I'm always as explicit as I can be within the limited detail. But what about yourselves? Do you feel a need to at all? Steve, should we go to you?
I realised, I apologise, I forgot to disclose what my disability is. So I actually have something called non-verbal learning disorder, and the only way I can explain it initially is to anyone that's old enough. I'm not. I've just had. I'm not old enough, but dyslexia in the 70s, when dyslexia was kind of around, kind of heard of, but nobody really knew what it was. And everyone's going to me, "Oh, you got dyslexia?" I'm like, well, no, actually, dyslexia is the left hemisphere of the brain. Mine's the right. So what I have issues with is a lot of processing. Things take me a lot longer to do stuff. I can read. I'm very articulate as I talk, but that can also be misleading. That's why a lot of children get undiagnosed as well as adults. Sorry, I do digress. I'm going to hurry up. Sorry, I've lost myself now. So obviously it can be kind of a confusing time when people who are there to support you don't know how to support you. But for me, the initial issue was being in the middle of lockdown, as I said before, and whilst at uni, before this whole COVID word had never been mentioned to anyone, we were told quite rightly by university, do not apply and accept the first school job you go for and you're successful with, because like you might not be right for them, they also might not be right for you. But of course then lockdown happened, and it was a case of what do I do now? I was getting online interviews. Do I accept a job? Do I tell them that I've got disability with the risk that they might say, do you know what, that's going to be too much work for us? But actually, going on the question of problems, if you don't mind me mentioning now, I did declare it. I had an interview with an academy that they were based around London. It was head teacher and the regional CEO, if you like. The head teacher was kind of sitting there looking at the ceiling as I'm trying to answer questions. I'm thinking, oh, this doesn't seem right. But there and then online, I declared, by the way, I've got a learning difficulty. Later on, I mean, I had many problems in terms of the support with this first school. In terms of, they would tell me that they were supporting me, nothing but support. But actually, I didn't feel supported. He then denied that I ever told him I had a learning difficulty. So obviously my recommendation for any teacher applying, now that you can, go to schools, interview with them, get a feel for the school, walk around. That obviously was something I couldn't do, and obviously that's the initial issue I had, and now things are different. But I'll leave it there for a moment.
No, I think that's a couple of great points, and obviously I think I also do want to stress for everyone listening along that in order for us to pivot from problems to solutions, we first need to address the problems, which is why we're starting with this, and then we're going to build on it. Molly, so yeah, how have you found sort of declaring your disability? Do you at all? When do you think is the best time to do
it? My experience of it has been a bit different. So my disability is quite invisible until it manifests itself in flares. I'm an ambulatory user of a crutch. So some days I wake up, don't need to use my crutch. Some days I wake up and I really need it. So people don't see my disability until it manifests itself as a physical issue. So when it came to me applying for my role currently with YPath, I didn't mention it in the interview, but we did obviously the forms you do as part of HR, and I added my health issues as well as my diagnosis of fibromyalgia, asthma, any of the things, possible medications that I might take that affect my work, as it's important as on a health and safety standpoint. However, I think that's the privilege that I get as a invisible illness haver, whereas it's, as you mentioned, yours is quite visible. Same with Zoe for using a wheelchair, and that's the kind of privilege I have, but it does make navigating the conversation of this is my disability quite difficult. Luckily, touch wood, I've never had to have had much difficulty or much awkwardness around disclosing my fibromyalgia.
Which, I mean, you know, there shouldn't be, because as I'm sure everyone here can appreciate, you know, a large proportion of the population are disabled. Disability is one of the few sort of categories of minority that intersects with every other single category of human ever. Fun factoid for you, which what makes it so beautiful. We're all just, you know, if you're in our club, we're all in it together, so we all support each other. I apologize to whoever asked this question, but I had to giggle when I read it. It said, you know, we're going to bring it into applying for jobs generally, but it was kind of asked, like, is there a specific place that we apply for jobs? Like, there's a special website just for disabled people and disabled jobs. And I laughed because I'd never, ever in my life thought to look for one. I'm sure there is, because, you know, the internet exists. But how have you found applying for jobs and sort of like looking for vacancies and physically trying to find those? Is there anything that you do specifically to look for disability chartered employers, maybe? Steve, can we go back to you, because I know you touched on this a little bit with schools specifically.
Yeah, sure. Without risk of being like, you know, Mr. Negative, I'll turn it around now. I'll put a spin on it. Just to touch on the first school that I went to after Edge Hill, there was a decision I had to make, and it was, right, I started off because I felt like a burden to them rather than you know, a member of the team. And this was partly because I feel that they were telling me, well, we're doing all this for you, what more do you want, sort of thing, you know. And it's kind of like, oh, sorry, I'm choosing to be a pain for you, or, you know, in the way. It was a case of, do I give up teaching? Because that's what I was starting to feel like. You know what, I'm not good enough to teach. I clearly shouldn't be doing this job. You know, I'm a bit of an imposter, and that was a big thing, imposter syndrome. I don't know if that applies in other jobs, but you know, even I think friends who don't have a disability, as a teacher, you get imposter syndrome. So
Steve, I can physically hear everyone screaming yes to imposter syndrome.
There you go. So we're all in that sort of situation at some point in our lives, but actually you would hope that the school would be like, well, listen, what can we do for you to support you, you know? And that wasn't happening. So it was a case of, do I stay on with the risk of failing my NQT year? Do I leave the school with risk of not getting continuous work in agency, which is, you know, a big no-no if I've got rent to pay and bills to pay, with the then hope that I find another permanent job, or do I stay on at the school with the risk that you know, I'll fail and it all just goes completely wrong. And I chose to leave, and it was probably one of the hardest decisions I could ever make. But it turns out I got tons of agency work, and I did a few schools, got a feel for it, remembered that actually, you know what, I can teach. I've got my way of doing something right. It works for me and actually works for the kids, you know. So I found a school, and then I ended up in a special needs school. Oddly enough, my mother, bless her, she always knows best, told me a few weeks before, you know what you need? You need to be working in a special needs school that's a lot smaller. And that's where I've ended up. So I'm now in a school that I did get to go and feel for it. I did get to speak to them. I told them in the interview that I had a learning difficulty. And then the assistant head came back to me about a week later and said, I've done some research on your learning difficulty. And I thought, wow, that's just blown my mind. You know, you're actually willing to do that for me. And since then, I've felt nothing but support in this school. I've applied for access to work because now I'm going permanent with them. I was agency under contract, and actually, I feel safe. I feel safe. I feel that I'm kind of worthy here. And actually, I'm making a difference because they value it, and it helps me to value myself. So yeah, things are looking up. So I would say the biggest suggestion I have or advice I would give you is just make sure you find what's right for you. Don't try and just do what's right for the employer, because it's about you at the end of the day.
Well, you make an excellent point there, and I think you did allude to it before. And I think it's easy to say more than it is to deal with, yeah, especially in the current climate. But when you go for an interview, you're interviewing them as well. Yeah, like you're seeing if they're right for you. It's not just you trying to be like, please pick me. I think that's a really important thing to reiterate, particularly when, I always like to get a little bit feisty, I'll say, where I challenge them and I'll be like, okay, well, what have you got, for me, sort of thing? What can you do to help me? And that's really important. So, Molly, if we can go over to you, how have you found sort of applications for jobs and sort of vacancies? Do you have anywhere particularly that you look, anything like that?
I haven't necessarily looked entirely for jobs since developing fibromyalgia and losing my voice due to COVID. So for me, my experience was back in June 2020, I contracted COVID. Following that year, I could not speak for 9 months. At that time, I was furloughed. I was working for an employee assistance company. I won't name names because I'm going to be a bit disparaging. However, because I lost my voice and my role was primarily through phone conversations, I was being asked to return to the office back in October times, and I had to go on sick for a while because I was still struggling with that initial infection. And this isn't my real voice, this is the voice that I've learned through vocal therapy, several months of it. And I sounded quite haggard. I'll be honest, I won't attempt to imitate what my voice used to sound like, but it would not be a phone number, it won't be a phone call voice you would want to hear on that line. But and then I felt pressured to leave that job because I was told it's just your voice, things like that. They weren't very aware of the other things that were impacting on myself, such as my ability to stay awake for the full day. My chronic fatigue was at an all-time high. And then coming out of that, I handed in my notice. I felt pressured to leave, and instead of being fired, I handed in my notice. And I spent from November up until March focusing on my master's. I had the privilege of living at home during the second and third COVID pandemic lockdown. I was supported by my parents as well as master's student loan. Yay! And I was made aware of the role at YPAS by a friend of mine. She encouraged me to apply. I did, and I was quite lucky to have gotten the job. So I never really had to go through the whole application process as a disabled person. And I kind of just want to pick up on something you said, Steve, about imposter syndrome. I was speaking beforehand to my family about coming to do this panel, thinking, I don't think I'm quite qualified in my own disability since I've only just developed it, which I know is completely rubbish. However, it's kind of that thing of you get imposter syndrome as a new graduate, you get imposter syndrome within work, but then I was also tackling this imposter syndrome with my disability coming onto this call and thinking to myself, I don't think I have the experience to talk about employability, considering that the first job that I applied for post masters and post diagnosis of fibromyalgia was the first job that I got. But you brought up something quite beautiful about getting a feel for the place. I entirely feel safe and protected and supported by my colleagues and management at YPass. And it's why I'm so eager to stick with them. I'm on a rolling contract because of the nature of charity work. We gotta have that funding, don't we? But I'm eager for them to keep me on each year because I am supported with my disability through YPass. So finding somewhere where you do feel safe and that there are colleagues and management to speak to you about and understanding your condition, I think it is an important thing. Yeah.
I mean, firstly, I want to point out it was never luck. It was all skill. The length of the job first, so let's get that out of the way. And I've scheduled in a few minutes for imposter syndrome towards the end of the session because that could be a whole other seminar. Again, I do also just want to sort of interject, and I think it's a really important thing in understanding disabilities. I saw a question come into chat, so I'm gonna bring us to that after Zoe. You've just told us a little bit about applying for jobs yourself. How do you find that? Where do you find your vacancies and such?
So I was quite nervous, I think, when I left university and started looking for jobs, because I obviously wanted to go into mental health, and a lot of the jobs that were on offer online, you needed an awful lot of experience, and I really struggled trying to find experience that I could do, because a lot of it was very physical, very physically demanding, and needed to be full-time, long hours that I just couldn't do. But I luckily kind of stumbled across this job within the NHS with a foundation trust in the Wirral, and they were so understanding right off the bat. They listened to what support they could offer. They let me do kind of a two-part interview process, where the first one was online, and then they let me go and see their base and see, you know, whether it was accessible, whether I could work from there, and if, you know, I felt it was manageable before I proceeded. So it went a lot better towards the end than it did at the beginning, when I was just terrified of looking for a job and, you know, wondering if I would ever be able to get a job in mental health. But overall, towards the end, it was just nice to know that there were positions available and there were companies that were willing to support you and offer you the help that you needed to allow you to do the job that you wanted to do. And, you know, there's no reason why you can't do the job that you want to. You just, as Steve says, you need to find your way of doing it.
And now for a message from our sponsor. Are you a disabled student? Or a student with a disability? Person or condition focused language is completely fine. You can use EHU Career Service even after you leave as a member of the alumni for up to several years, I forget the exact number, and make use of the excellent services available to enhance your application and help you right the way through the process, from applying for a job, finding a vacancy, right the way through to starting it. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I will jump in on the end and give a reminder of our services as well. But yes, thank you for the sponsor.
Pay promotional material, it's fine. So one of the questions that came up in chat, and it's something I was going to pick up from what you said as well, Steve. When you said that your employer at interview actually sort of said they'd research your disability, I don't think I'd be happy with that. I would find that quite uncomfortable, and to be quite honest, that would burn my toast, for lack of a less expletive euphemism. Because and this, everyone buckle up, this might shock you, but like, not all disabled people are the same. Like, I'm legally blind, so my disability is blindness, visual impairment, but like, I have some vision, and that's different to someone who has no vision. So we'd have two completely different sets of needs. So it's kind of, to reiterate for the benefit of the non-disabled members of the audience, all disabled people are not the same. We all have different needs, but how have you found that? Like, how do you think that process of explaining, or, you know, having someone read up about your disability, how do you think that would make you feel? I think we'll go back around Zoe, yourself, if you'd like to start us off.
So that's quite a common thing that I've always found very frustrating, because my diagnosis is technically a type of muscular dystrophy, but it really doesn't fit. I mean, I don't think anything fits on mold, but if you were to read up on it and then look at me, it's very different. And I have struggled a lot to try and explain it to people because, like everyone, I have good days and bad days. And on a bad day, you know, I do have to use my wheelchair and I struggle a lot with energy levels. But on a good day, you know, I don't need to use my wheelchair. And I've found that that is something that people really struggle to get their head around because it's like they think, well, you're either in a wheelchair or you're not. So sometimes trying to explain, well, I'm a bit in the middle, you know, it's very dependent. A lot of people do struggle to understand. So for me personally, I always just try and say to people, like, look, the more time you spend with me, the more you'll get to know. And, you know, I'm very good at communicating what I need. So trying to just say, don't Google it, just spend time with me and get to know me. And then that's the best way of doing it.
Zoe, you can't be coming up in this panel and hitting us with such blatant logic as to get to know the disabled people that you work with. That is outrageous. Google should be able to tell us everything we need. What is this panel? We've fallen into disarray. Honestly, I'm joking, obviously being purely facetious. Molly, how about yourself? How have you found sort of like that conversation or something around that sort of dialogue?
I just echoing what Zoe said. I think it is a case of I appreciate the effort into understanding my condition. However, like you mentioned, how we all know, or we all take for granted that we know that disability varies from person to person. Again, I have fibromyalgia, but there are varying degrees of how it affects individuals. I think one that sticks out in my mind is a famous person who has fibromyalgia is Lady Gaga. She does concerts every other night in Vegas or something like that, and I think to myself, God, I wish I could do that. I can't get out of bed after having a busy week or things like that. And it is a case of, if I appreciate people learning on the topic, how they think they might be able to best support me. But it's like the thing when it comes with unsolicited advice. If someone's saying, oh, my auntie has fibromyalgia and she tries I'm like, but I'm not your auntie, am I? And it's that kind of thing of, luckily, touch wood, I've never experienced it in work myself or within education. However, I understand that it is a issue that happens within everyday life, which does not separate it from happening outside of education and employment.
Okay, that's great. Steve, do you have anything else to add? I know we kind of springboarded from your point there.
Excuse me. Yeah, I just think it's more, you know, in context of from where I came from, the previous school, and their sort of attitude towards me, and you know, it was the case of they would keep telling me that, you know, we're supporting you. We've done everything you've asked for. You know, we've done your access to work. What more do you want, sort of thing? And I, because I didn't feel, I just felt like I was at this point I was in the way. So to have left that school and then gone to a school interview, I mentioned, you know, my learning difficulty, non-verbal learning difficulty or disorder or NLD, whatever it's called. At different times, it always seems to change. I mean, firstly, I argue that it's wrongly named anyway. You know, there's more to me not being able to always read verbal cues. You know, there's a lot of other issues I have. One being the fact that, you know, a lesson plan that should take someone 40 minutes might take me 2.5, 3 hours. And I think because I often also find it hard, I don't always find it hard to understand my own learning difficulty, but to always explain how it affects me. It can be different in different situations. And the fact that, you know, my manager was kind of willing to, I suppose because it's a special needs school as well, this is what she does. This is her specialism, working with special needs. And because she's willing to sort of do her own research, because I could tell that her idea was to support me, that just meant so much more to me then. It was like a relief. Oh, actually, I'm not going to be yet another burden to another school. I'm not going to be another fail, you know. And it was like, finally, someone's listening to me and they're willing to understand, you know. So I feel the way that in my case, it was a positive thing that they would, go and do their research and try and sort of get clued up on it a bit better.
Okay, it's kind of I'm kind of leapfrogging my own sort of questions here, but to kind of flip this on its head, and this is about to get feisty, so I apologize for everyone watching. But what are your experiences with sort of tokenism? Because one of the things that really grinds my gears is being the very obviously only disabled person in a workplace or in a team, and whenever something to do with EDI or equality, diversity, inclusion, or disability comes up, they're like, run it past Chris. Like, Chris, does this work for you? Yeah, it's all good for all disabled people then. Or like, hey, look, this is Chris. He's disabled and he works here. And it's taking the mick a little bit, isn't it? Taking just a smidge, taking the mick. How have your experiences been with anything around that? And it's not necessarily always done with a vicious intent or maliciously, but for me, it's like that added weight of not only am I constantly fighting that extra sort of 25% to stay at the level everyone else is at, to validate my own existence in a world that is not designed for me and designed for able people only, but also then being turned to be like the poster boy for disability in that workplace. It's like an added bit of strain. And yes, they think it's great and they think they're championing it, but like, either hire me as a consultant, pay me a bit extra, or get someone else in who's an actual professional. That would turn into a rant, not a question. That's a good example of what not to ask in chat. Molly, any thoughts on this?
I can't talk from a personal experience. As I mentioned, I have a invisible disability. When people look at me, they don't necessarily see me as the token poster person for fibromyalgia or long COVID. So I truly would find it would grind my gears, though. I do experience it sometimes on the level of LGBT and queer. Yes. So some people might ask for my opinion as an LGBT person, which I'm like, I only represent one of the acronyms, so I can't really speak for everyone else, unfortunately. So I really wish I could answer that a bit more helpfully, I suppose. But for me, it's kind of like I've never had that.
Is a perfect answer. It's about your experience. I want to touch on that note because it reminded me of an anecdote. I was having this type of conversation with a colleague who was bisexual, and like we were having this experience of like, yeah, they're just coming to me with all the disability stuff, and her response was, yeah, they're just coming to me for the LGBTQIA plus stuff. I just want to be quiet, bisexual, and get on with my work. And I was like, yeah, I know. I want to get on with my work. Zoe, how about yourself?
This is something that I've experienced quite a lot, sadly. The high school that I went to, they had never had a disabled student before, and it wasn't built for disabled students, but they accepted me to go, and it was just when I'd started using my wheelchair, and they used me as like the poster girl of, look, we've got a disabled student, now we can take more disabled students on, but they didn't because they weren't qualified for it. But it was really hard because it was upstairs, so they used to have to bring a lot of my lessons downstairs, and a lot of the teachers would quite obviously in front of me express their frustration of having to move their classes downstairs just for me. And throughout high school, I just constantly felt like I was in the way, like I was a problem, because they accepted me into the school when they really weren't prepared, and it was very obvious they were just trying to look good as having a disabled student, but they had no idea how to support me or what to offer me or anything. So yeah.
Hold the phone. What is this? Ableds expressing outrage at having to go through what can best be described as a minor inconvenience. Colour me surprised. by which I mean not at all surprised and completely expecting of that, which is outrageous. My rage was bubbling up as you were describing that experience. I'd like to, again, reverse this because we like to do cyclical things like that here. I mean, I rock being the poster boy for disability, you know what I mean? I'm sure you did as well, Zoe, but like, yo, pay me a bit extra for it, you know what I mean? I have a consultancy thing by the hour, thanks. Steve, over to yourself.
I'm just really thinking back to my previous school. Really, I mean, here I feel that I'm being really sort of supported and they're understanding, because we deal with children who are autistic every single day. So it's not an issue here at all. I don't know if I was ever seen as kind of like the token person with learning difficulty, but I can tell you now, I was definitely a burden. I was definitely, it was just, everything was an effort for me. And and they would, I mean, this school, obviously, which I also won't mention, is renowned for having extremely high expectations, which are for a lot of the teachers unattainable. And it's an academy, so it's treated like a business before an education. Don't even get me started on that. I could
Wait,
rant about
education being ruined by capitalism. Calling me surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I could argue about that all night, but the fact that they would say to me, look, we've got these support things in plan for, sorry, I can't speak. We've got these support plans in place for you. What more do you want? But then at the same time, they give me yet more work. And I'm kind of trying to battle to get my work from last week finished. And I've got, the rest of the week to do another 2 or 3 weeks work. And I'm stressing over the weekend, spending the whole weekend without any kind of break, just getting work done and doing 40, 50, 60 books a night marking. I was my mental health was just completely dropping. And it took my family and friends to sort of, give me a metaphoric slap around the face, should we say? But
welcome
just to
encouragement, maybe.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, just to say, look, you are not happy. You need to get out. You need to stop. So rather than being the token guy, it was more the, we wish he would sort of not be here kind of guy. But as I say, I'm happy now. I'm in a place where that doesn't happen, and I'm supported, and I don't, if anything, I mean, I suppose there could be risk in a school that, you've got a kind of a form of learning difficulty that's a bit like Asperger's or autism. Why don't you go and sit with the boy that's got autism? I suppose I could see that happening, but I personally haven't experienced that yet.
So I think both yourself and Molly have kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to just take the conversation a little bit further. So I'll start with you, Zoe, if that's all right. But what have sort of been your primary challenges with interviews? It relates to another question that popped up in chat, and we talked about disclosure before. I had an experience once where I applied for a job, disclosed that I was visually impaired, as you do, and it was over in 15 minutes. They had no interest in hiring me. It was a waste of my time, their time, but they were obliged to give me the interview. So I'd rather just not been invited to interview. I wasn't gonna be that person that complains to HR, because it would have just saved everyone more time and mental and physical effort. So what sort of challenges have you faced with sort of interviews specifically? Again, Zoe, we'll sort of start with you because the other two sort of covered this a smidge.
Yeah, there's definitely been a couple occasions where it was very obvious I was just being interviewed because they had to interview me. Because obviously with the job that I'm in, most of my job interviews went through the NHS job site, so they have like that little box at the bottom that says if you do have a disability, then and you meet the minimum requirement, then you will be guaranteed an interview. And it was definitely a bit disheartening at times, because you do always wonder, like, have I got this interview because you want me, or are you just interviewing me to tick a box? And there were a couple at the beginning where it was very obvious, they didn't want me, but luckily the job that I have now, they really were interested in like the experience I did have, my volunteer work, and what skills I had to make me qualified for this job. So it was the first time that I'd really felt like, oh, they want me for me, not because they have to.
Excellent. And again, I know, Molly, Steve, you kind of touched on this a little bit. Anything else you'd like to add before we gear things forward?
I'll just quickly add. I think one of the problems I've had in the past, and obviously, not obviously to me, you guys don't know me. Prior to me being diagnosed, I had no idea that one of my issues was processing. So I would continually be asked a question in an interview, and I'm answering a question, not actually understanding what they just asked me, and it can take me sort of 3-4 times. For them, for me to ask them 3-4 times for me to understand what I'm supposed to be answering, and I've always found that as failed me in an interview. I've come out and I've found that I've not really answered what they were looking for, when actually I might have had experience or the ability to get the answer that's right, for them, and it can be difficult. But I don't know. You've made me think, Zoe, about the whole tick boxing, because I see that and I tick that box, because technically, I do have a learning difficulty. I have a disability, but then for me, it's also that fine line of, well, do they mean? Because I'm sure sometimes they're different. Do they mean physical disability? I mean, I feel like I've got a body of a 70-year-old, but I'm not technically physically disabled. But sometimes it's not very clear. So sometimes I don't know whether to tick that box or not. But actually, I do think, do they want to interview me because of my experience, or are they interviewing me just because Equality Act says so? And it's always, I suppose, in the back of my mind. I don't know what you guys think.
It's also worth pointing out, for sort of clarity and sort of legislative purposes, mental health is covered under sort of disability and equality related legislation here in the UK. It has more slightly sophisticated, or at least separate legislation in the US, as far as I am aware. But mental health would be its own panel. I think invite us to do another one. We're available. But yeah, Molly, any of the sort of just comment about sort of interviewing, particularly as you mentioned that you didn't disclose your disability at that point?
I think both Steve and Zoe have kind of addressed it perfectly, and I think you brought it up with the fact that if we're being invited to interviews to fit a tick box to hit a diversity quota, I think making them more accessible interviews, so maybe not asking us to trod halfway across city centres or travel to places, make them more accessible for us. So for Steve's sense, making the questions easier to comprehend, for yourself with your blindness. For me, I know that if I was to hit a diversity quota, I would enjoy having the interviews through online means, in the sense that I won't have to force myself out of the house to do these interviews. But I think both Steve and Zoe and yourself hit it perfectly on the head there.
Well, excellently, that acts as a lead into my next question, which is, how do you all feel about hybrid working? Now, for those that don't know, hybrid working was something members of the disabled community were banging on about for literally decades, to be able to work from home, because you'll essentially get more out of us if we are feeding the capitalist beast that it is. But the arguments are always there. We haven't got the facilities for it. We don't know if you'll actually be working. Heard it all before me. But as soon as oh yeah, now we've just got 100 work laptops, everyone can go work from home. Oh look, it's now cheaper, so we'll get rid of the office. That's great. That works for me. I've got a very customized and specific setup, which is why you don't often see me on campus, to be honest, because why leave when you've got the perfect setup at home? So what are your sort of opinions on hybrid working? I mean, I'm obviously very pro hybrid working. Why would I travel? Put myself through the effort of traveling. Yes, I'm that much of a diva. For like a 1-hour meeting I could have online, and particularly in the advent of COVID. Anyone want to kick us off? I'll let you guys choose.
I'm happy to kick this off, really. So for me, part of my job is working face to face with young people. I go into primary schools as part of the Seedlings Therapeutic Provision. So I work with children amongst 5 to 11 years old. Some of these children are vulnerable, and some of these children can't do sessions online because of safety and safeguarding. So it's important for me to go into work to go to these schools and have these sessions face to face. However, when it comes to hybrid working, I am a huge fan. So when it comes to Thursdays, which are my admin days, I mourn the loss of being able to wake up at 8:30 and throw on my clothes and then do my job. It made the week much more bearable for me with someone with a disability, and it's dependent on things of movement and stress. So I personally have been a fan of hybrid working, and I've seen it for myself. My dad has worked from home since 2015, really. So he's really the one who showed me that hybrid working is quite attainable for those with disabilities and without.
Anyone else who's going to be? Oh,
I don't mind jumping in. So I am a huge fan of hybrid working. My working week is split in half a bit. So 2 days a week I do have to commute to my job. One of them is when I go into primary schools and help deliver mental health sessions. The other is in the office. And then the third day I get to work from home. It's definitely been a lot easier on the days when I do have to work from home, because I do feel like I'm a lot more productive because I'm not burning anywhere near as much energy trying to get there. And then I also sometimes run into complications when I do have to do school visits, because not all of them are accessible. Like, prime example, one I went to yesterday, as soon as you walk in, there's 5 steps to get to the meeting room. And I actually had to ask a member of staff to help me get up them, because there's no way I could have done that on my own. And it's just stuff like that that does make the job even harder, But yeah, definitely a big fan of working from home.
Steve, over to you. Obviously teaching. I imagine you'll have an opinion.
100%. 100%. If COVID has not taught us that actually hybrid working is a good idea, then nothing will teach us that. I cannot understand why there is this push to not to not do it, to keep it everyone in work. I mean, it's better for the environment if people work from home. Obviously there's saving on fuel costs, which we know are through the roof now. I mean, I'm personally considering either sawing or selling my car to save money, because living in down south, it's very expensive. And I just can't afford it on my wage. We know full well how much more productive people are. Obviously, unlike the children that I work with, adults are, not going to go and play with their friends while they should be working. They're going to do their job. They're going to work from home because that's what they're paid to do. They're sensible people. If obviously I told my children, right, we're going to go home today, but you're going to do work from 9 till 3. Of course they're not. They're children. But adults have got enough sense to be productive from home and have a healthy work-life balance where they might have children, families, other commitments. It just makes sense. And I feel that I could be supported just as well in my disability. I mean, at Edgehill, through the DSL, I had funding for a support worker that would be online, going through anything from my lesson planning to an essay. And sometimes I just need someone with me so I can go through, process stuff, and organize my brain as well as everything else. That's been offered to me now through DSA. That could happen, at home on my PPA time. So I'm 100% for it. Sorry, I think I'm a bit. I should stop now. I'm gonna I'm gonna
It's
calm
fine.
down.
Do not worry. I will say I'm conscious of time, so we're gonna sort of open it up as a bit of a lightning round. So everyone, mic's unmuted. Let's go. First to the buzzer. I'm joking. The first thing I sort of wanted to pick on here is I'm conscious of we're getting towards the end of time, but is there anything that's sort of been like a small gesture from your employer that has made a huge difference? We kind of touched on these things a little bit, but I remember for me one of the big things was just them sitting down saying, "What can we do? If it's in a form and it's written down, we'll do it." And me being like, actually, I don't need like everything, all the bells and whistles and stuff. It's all fine. But just that little thing of like, one of my former managers was absolutely amazing woman, but just really just generally supportive. I think that makes a difference. Is there any sort of like small, maybe borderline tokenistic gestures that, you found to be really powerful?
Shall I quick? I'll be very quick. And then I'll promise I'll be quiet. My school is starts off with the children. It's all about nurture. The children are nurtured, but it doesn't stop there. They nurture the teachers. They nurture the adults. They nurture the staff. And because it's all about nurture, we're known as a family of schools. There's about 10 of us now, and we're still growing. We are treated like we're one big family, and that doesn't just help me, someone with a disability. It helps all of us. Whatever we need, we know we could just come and talk to them, and they say, "Look, what is it we can do to help you?"
Next, go.
When I took time off sick, I came back to my return to work meeting, and my manager sat me down and we addressed what could have been preventative with myself taking that time off as being sick, but at the same time also what we could do to support myself going forward. So some of you might know that fibromyalgia can be exacerbated by stress. I utilised the employee assistance program with our work through the suggestion of my manager, so that I could receive therapy so that I'm not as stressed as often. That still isn't quite true though, is it?
Pro therapy. Everyone should have therapy. Zoe, go on.
For myself, the office that I have to work in once a week, it wasn't the most accessible. It had this really big step to get in that I couldn't get up unattended. So I spoke to my manager on my first day of work, and within a couple of days they had one of them disabled handles fitted outside so that I can access the office on my own, and just that little gesture really meant a lot to me.
Excellent. Okay, I'm going to boil this down to a yes or no purely for cheek, and I'm going to combine two questions. So I apologize, member of the audience, to put these together. But would positive action statements or sort of practices sort of advertised online or being part of disability charters or anything impact your desire and or willingness to apply for a role? For me, I'm going to say the answer is no, because businesses love to collect badges, stickers, and token trophies that they don't often actually adhere to. Cynical, yes, but once bitten, twice shy. Am I right? But systematically, I've also worked in institutions that have none of these accolades working towards them, but have been incredible. Molly, let's start with you.
I would say no, and for the same reason for yourself. I worked with a company that had Stonewall accreditation, but did really nothing to help with their LGBT members of staff.
What? Tokenistic awards? Calling me surprised. Zoe.
Yeah, I would have to say no too, for the same reasons. I think people love to say that they're pro this, pro that, but no, definitely not.
Steve, over to you.
You might be surprised to know that I agree with you. As someone who's also LGBT, you've only got to look at the ASDA website right now. That's got a lovely rainbow over it because it's Pride Month. Waste of time. I'm not gonna shop at yours just because you agree with my sexuality and you support it. But you only support it for a month, so let's hurry up and shop there before it becomes July. So yeah, no.
Hold the phone. Capitalism prioritizing and absolutely making a tokenistic demonstratory perspective of a cultural event to appease and or draw in a certain group of people for capitalistic gain. Call that me not surprised. Am I right? Okay. Moving swiftly on to the next question. How have you found sort of Edge Hill as an institution compared to others such as high school or sixth form? I'm uniquely placed to sort of answer this one as someone that has studied and worked at other institutions that shall not be named because I'm, kosher. But generally, I think HE is quite a good environment because they understand right through from students, undergraduates with additional needs and disabilities that, we come in staff size as well, and are generally quite supportive. Zoe, your thoughts?
I agree. The first time I started to feel supported in my disability was when I came to Edge Hill. Even the campus alone, when I lived there, was the most accessible place I've ever been in my life. And it's so welcoming, nothing's too much trouble. It's just amazing. I haven't got a negative thing to say about it.
Steve, over to you.
Absolutely outstanding. I will always think fondly of Edge Hill. The support, the campus, one of the most beautiful campuses. I went to Roehampton for my first year, and very, very similar. They're like sister universities, but actually Edge Hill smashes that right out the park. So it's just been a wonderful, supportive, very busy but very short 1 year. And I would go back in a heartbeat if I could.
Molly.
Edge Hill is a fantastic university to go to, and on the basis of disability, I found both as an able-bodied student and then when I returned as a student with a disability, I couldn't have received further support because it was top-notch. And if Paula, my old lecturer, happens to be watching this back at some point, she should know that I harassed her daily when I couldn't speak. I would send her emails and emails, and I've never felt further supported by someone.
Edge Hill, sigh into. I'm saying all this. They pay me to teach students. See how long TEF Gold lasts. Am I right? Anywho, so one more, chew a little bit more. I'm conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes before I pass over back to Alex. Unless people want to keep asking questions, do please populate the chat with those. But what would your number one piece of advice be to responding to negative experiences? We've touched on quite a few of them. We've all had those situations that do not go our way. What would that sort of top tip be as someone with a disability? Because it is really downheartening and really challenging when you keep getting the knockback or simply people taking the mick a little bit. You know what I mean? For me, my top tip would just be just keep on going. Make use of the career services. At the end of the day, applications, I've marked job applications, and they're by and large tick box point scoring exercises, same with interviews. So it's often just about ticking what they want, and people like those in careers will know what they are and can help you make sure you're smashing those. But in terms of bouncing back, just do not give up. If it matters, it matters to you, keep going. We'll go around the other way. Molly, we'll start with you.
For me, it would be make yourself known, maybe even shout and scream if you have to. I know this is a bit rich for a therapist to tell people to communicate, but
What?
But I can't stress enough that if we're talking to people, if we're honest and open and have these talks and communications that seem awkward to begin with, but we persevere and push through them, there's someone going to be listening to you, and there's someone that's going to be like, oh, that's not right, and maybe it might be an able-bodied person to shout for us, or another person with a disability that can help support us through that kind of peer support. But truly, I do think that when we talk to others and make ourselves known and heard, it truly can help.
Zoe, yourself.
Honestly, just to keep going, dust yourself off, get back up and get back on the horse. I think we've all experienced negatives, and it's very disheartening when you do get knocked back from your job interviews. And I honestly thought I would never ever be accepted into a job, but luckily I did, and it was purely through perseverance. But I would say that if you are struggling, that definitely seek advice from the careers people, because they really can help you put your best self forward.
And Steve.
I think Molly and Zoe have really touched well. I would agree on communication and really perseverance. Just perseverance was key for me, and also find your path. Find your path that works for you, because no two students are the same, and it's the same as, you know, like me with children. Like teaching children, I have to realise that every individual child is different. Is individual. You know, their needs are individual as well, unique. That's what I was looking for. And you know, just have some self-belief, because you are worthy, you are valid, and you are or should be celebrated, because you've all got something to bring to the table.
It's almost as if, I don't know, call me radical, but diversity is a thing that creates creativity, application, and a more well-rounded and just ultimately better place in the universe. That's just me, radical, cynical man wearing a blazer. What can you do? We have got time for one more question. Again, I'm going to be a bit of a negative Nancy on this one. When applying for jobs and interviews, I have turned the disability question on its head and focused on my abilities and have been positive. Has this approach worked for you? And would you advise students to do the same? Honestly, no. You can put a goat in a tuxedo, but it's still a goat. I can bang on about how brilliant I am with my analytical ability, my ability to present, my ability to write academic words. It does not change the fact my eyes do not work. So you can be positive and you can be constructive, but I would always say, look, I'm blind, so I need X, Y, Z. I physically in interviews will challenge and say, okay, what can you do for me because I'm blind and I have these additional needs? Can you meet them? And it's a scary thing to do because, you know, you're hoping you want to get a job, but by being that little bit demanding and saying, well, actually, if you want me to work for you, I need this. So I don't think there's just like toxic positivity is a thing, not to crack open another nut, but ultimately it's not going to change the fact that I'm disabled and people view that as a negative. Anyone else's thoughts, feel free to jump in. Molly, you got something to say?
No, I like the idea of it changing it on its head and seeing our disabilities as an ability, as a different ability. However, I agree with what you said when you put a goat. I like that one. The goat, put a goat in a tuxedo. It's still a goat. I'm going to steal that one now. It comes inside with toxic positivity, but at the same time, I feel like when we go into interviews, we have to sell ourselves in a weird way. We have to put our best foot forward. So I could go into an interview and say, please be very mindful that if I do one step out of a different ankle, if I step weird, my ankle flares up for the rest of the month. But how could I make that a positivity at the same time? Like, I'll always stay at my desk. I don't know. So I'll think about that one, but I kind of agree with it being an ability, but also maybe how can we kind of share that within an interview and kind of sell our best selves, really.
Honesty, transparency for sure, but I think the point is that is not going to stop you from doing the amazing work that you do. It's not a subtractive. The fact that we have a subtractive perspective is a problem with broader society that we'll not get into in these closing moments. Zoe, perspective.
Yeah, honestly, in my job, I have kind of used my disability and experiences to try and help use it in my job, really, because I see it from a different side. I see it both from the side as a clinical support worker, but also a bit from the child's perspective. So I've tried to use it as a positive in that, like that side of things, and show that, yeah, just try and draw upon past experiences, really.
Steve.
Yeah, once again, I think you guys have really sort of said everything I wanted to say. Apart from, I agree, honesty is important, and if end of the day, you know, they're not going to be sort of interested because of what you've told them, then they're not the right employer for you. You know, you need to find somewhere where you can be honest and you can be open, and that's been my experience. You know, recently, my last job, although I was honest with them, I didn't feel supported. I've come to this school, interview there and then. I said, right, cards on the table. This is my learning difficulty. I've told them exactly what it is. I think that the whole giving it a positive spin can work if you do it for you, not for them. That's the key. Because you say, I mean, we should all be celebrating our disability in a way, because there's a lot of benefits we can make out of it, having disability. That probably comes out wrong, but you know what I mean. It's not all negative, and as long as you're doing it for your reasons, not theirs, then I think it's only positive.
No, I think you make a great point. Like I would say, I mean, I involve myself with the video game industry quite a lot, and one of the big things that I do to sort of get in the door is, yeah, do you want to talk about accessibility? Because it's important, because disabled people have money and we like to play video games. And if that gets you through the door, that gives you then the chance to make a change. Now, I'm conscious of time. I will be handing over to Alex in a moment, but I'd like to just do a little closing statement myself. Firstly, I want to thank the panelists for joining me, for their incredible insight, experience, knowledge, wisdom, and for dealing with my somewhat sassy moderation. Secondly, yourselves for listening and for populating the chat with your questions. I hope we've answered them in a way that was not quite as, spiteful and or sarcastic, but I am fueled exclusively by caffeine, spite, and the desire for science. Lastly, one of the biggest things I think has come out of this chat, and I think one of the takeaways for myself, is that what I want you to remember is that when you're a member of the disabled community, you are constantly fighting to help validate your place in the world, in the workplace. And that's the same for other minorities as well, because the world is not made for us. And what you've witnessed here is 3 people incredibly talented and gifted who have fought that extra 10, that extra 25% to make themselves heard and known, and to fight for that place in the world. But we shouldn't have to. The world should be accessible for everyone. We should all have equal opportunity and ability to engage and be part of the institutions that we want to be part of. Ultimately, we're doing what we're doing because we believe in it, because we're passionate, because we have a desire, and in the case of my 3 guests here, because they very clearly want to produce positive change for other people. It is not our job to help entirely reshape the world. You need to meet us halfway. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. No, very inspirational, and I've got to agree with Daniel in the chat. "Colour me surprised" is a new one of my favourite catchphrases as well. Yeah, so just I'd like to express my own thanks. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's panel. I hope it's been as rewarding to you as it has been to me. Talking about topics like this, I think it's so important to build awareness, to understand each other. I think someone said it earlier. We don't all fit the same mold. Molly's not like her friend's auntie. Zoe's not like the Wikipedia description of Google. My experience as someone with dyslexia personally has not given me the same experience as the other people in this room today. So having these conversations, you said it yourself, Steve. Getting to know the individual is so important. So I personally feel really inspired by everything you've had to say. Regardless of my role in careers as well, I feel more at ease with these topics, hearing about your lived experiences and what you've done as you've gone out there into the wider world after university. So yeah, and that reassurance as well. You talked about the imposter syndrome. Certainly, always feel that. And it's reassuring hearing that you feel that as well. So Zoe, Molly, Steve, thank you so much for being a part of the panel today, for being willing to join us and talk about your experiences with us all so openly. I'm sure there's a lot of people in the session that have absolutely loved hearing from you. I will be asking for feedback from them after the session as well, so I'll happily share some of that with you, because I'm sure there's some messages as well as popping up in the chat now that they'd like to thank you for being here. And Chris, a special thank you to you as well for being the moderator for today's panel, for handling that chat expertly, as well as fielding doing the moderation in those questions, and helping our panelists, I'm sure, feel at ease today, and for sharing your own stories and experiences as well. It's really, really appreciated. As well as all of our audience for being here today. So if anyone wants to contact any of our panelists, there will be some slides on rotation at the end of the session with some details that they've been happy to put out there if you've got any questions or comments to put to them, as well as Chris's too. And yeah, as discussed, I'll be sharing a recording of this session with all those that have booked on. If you wanted to watch it back, if you thought, oh, there was a nugget in there, I'll need to go back to that one later. I'll also include the feedback form in that email. We'd love to hear your thoughts after the session. We are looking at doing more panels like this in the future. I saw one up there. Maybe we'll have one looking at mental health issues in careers and other topics like that. We'd love to hear what you would like to see in the next panel as well. And
Imposter syndrome's got to be up there as well. Am I right?
well, yeah, there's a workshop in that. And yeah, I'll share some resources in that as well that I find particularly useful. There's some great resources on Scope, Citizens Advice that I live by as well, and I'll happily share those with everyone. And yeah, on that note, before I go, I'd like to go back to our sponsor for today. I am from the careers team, so my name's Alex, and yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the support that we give from careers here at Edgehill University to our students and to our alumni as well. So, Steve, you said your advice would be to find your path. Well, that's why the careers team is here at Edgehill University. If you don't know what you want to do after your degree, it's the perfect time to come and talk to the Edgehill Careers team. It's not just for when you're going for an interview or you've got that application to put in. We'll happily have those conversations about, okay, where is my path? What do I want to do next? What am I good at? How do I get better at this thing that I want to do? So it's never a wrong time to come and speak to careers. If you go to ehu.ac.uk/careers, all our information and guidance is on there. You can ask a question online via the Ask a Question button. It's hopefully big there and bold. As well as that, we can book appointments and deliver those virtual for anyone that's hybrid working, or we can do that in person too. We've got a brand new shiny careers corner in Catalyst as well. So if you come through the door, just to the right hand side, we've got the careers corner there. You can drop in and speak to us for a short kind of quick questions here and there. Or I said you can book a more kind of in-depth appointment online. And yeah, if you do know exactly what you want to do, it's also a good time to talk to us. We've got loads of resources on where to go looking for jobs, how to make sure your application is perfect, how to really sell yourself. And yeah, we can check those applications in advance. We can even do practice interviews with you if you just kind of want to build your confidence before you go into the actual interview. And my role personally within the careers team, I'm here to give extra support to students who do have disabilities above and beyond what we'd normally offer students. So if you have any particular questions about your disabilities and going into employment, I work with the inclusion team and the SPLD team here at university. We can talk to you about kind of your specific circumstances and any questions that you have, and we more than happily do that. Yeah, and I'm glad we've had this session. It's Learning Disability Week, Awareness Week next week. So we're doing it around that time as well. And recently there was a report that was released by the Disabled Students Commission that just really highlighted the kind of the gap in positive outcomes between non-disabled and disabled students. And I think hearing these stories and people having role models and kind of that building of confidence is so important to kind of helping us achieve those positive outcomes with yourselves and making sure that you can get to where you want to be. So thank you once again for everyone that came and joined us today. On that note, I will say goodbye and I'll let you all be free. I'll put the slides with contact details on rotation now if I can share my screen successfully. But thank you once again and have a good evening, everyone.
You'll definitely want to stick around for mine. It's a proper business card, just saying. It's worth watching.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.